Welcome. Tonight, we will journey far back in time into the world of ancient China, a land of vast rivers and mountains, of bamboo groves and quiet courtyards, where the rhythm of daily life was slow, steady, and filled with silence. But stillness was not always peaceful. For those who dreamed of becoming scholars, silence could be heavy, cold, and demanding. Imagine yourself seated in a scholar's room. A lamp flickers beside you, its flame bending in the draught. A scroll stretches across the table before you. Your hand holds a brush, its bristles darkened with ink. This is the world we will enter tonight. We will move gently through four paths. First, the daily life of study, a world of ink, cold rice, and long scrolls. Then the patience of Confucius, the philosopher whose quiet teachings shaped a nation of thinkers. Afterward, we will enter the forbidden library, shelves of hidden texts whispered in secrecy across generations. And finally, we will step into the scholar's retirement. Mandarin gardens and silk scrolls, poetry written beneath blossoms, and koi ponds where reflections tremble softly in the evening light. Each part of this journey will move at an unhurried pace. Each pause will be gentle. Each word will carry you closer to calm and closer to sleep. So close your eyes if you wish, let your breath settle, and let us begin the journey together. Imagine yourself in a scholar's room in ancient China. The walls are bare, whitewashed with clay. The floor is simple earth, swept clean. A wooden table sits low to the ground, its edges rounded from years of use. A mat of woven reeds is laid before it, and on that mat you sit cross-legged, your robe falling about you in long folds. Your robe itself is plain. The cloth is coarse but warm, dyed in muted colors, usually gray or blue. A scholar was not meant to dazzle with appearance. Instead, dignity was found in simplicity. The robe covers you like a shield against the chill, but the air seeps in still. You draw it closer around your shoulders. On the table rests your world, the inkstone heavy and smooth, darkened with use. The ink stick, slender, with faint carved patterns worn nearly away from countless hours of grinding. A porcelain water dish, chipped at the rim. A handful of brushes of different sizes, their tips soft, their handles carefully arranged so none touch the ground. Paper is stacked to one side, not plentiful, never wasted. Beside it lies a scroll, already filled with characters copied in neat rows. Each mark represents hours of effort, patience made visible. You light a lamp, its glow is dim and unsteady, casting more shadow than light. The oil has a faint scent, sharp yet comforting, the smell of long nights of study. The flame bends in the draught of the room, and your shadow stretches tall across the wall, silent company in your solitude. The first sound of the day is the grinding of ink. Water drops into the hollow of the stone. The inkstick is pressed down, and your hand moves in circles, slow and steady, round and round, round and round. The faint scrape is the only sound. It becomes a rhythm, a kind of music. The mind drifts with it. Sometimes it feels endless. Sometimes it feels timeless. The scent rises as the ink darkens, earthy, smoky, faintly resinous. This ritual alone could take half an hour. It is not wasted time. It is part of the training, part of shaping the self. When the ink is ready, you lift the brush. The bristles have been soaked and shaped to a fine point. The first character is written slowly. Each stroke is measured, deliberate. To rush would be to fail. Each character must be balanced, top and bottom, left and right, heavy and light. The hand trembles slightly in the cold, but steadies with practice. Soon the brush begins to flow, one stroke after another, the page filling gradually. The text is not new. It is not meant to be new. These are the words of Confucius, the wisdom of the ancients, the Analects, the book of rites, the book of songs. Each line has been copied before, recited before, memorized before, yet still it must be copied again. This is the essence of study, not novelty, but repetition. Knowledge carved slowly into the mind, like water carving channels into stone. The day is divided by silence. Morning study stretches into midday. A pause is taken for food, but the food is plain, quickly consumed. Rice, sometimes cool, sometimes warm, pickled vegetables, salty and sharp, a thin broth, light and almost tasteless. There is no conversation. Eating in silence is considered proper. To speak while eating would break the discipline, and so the scholar eats quietly, chews slowly and returns to the table. The pressure of family weighs heavily. Parents expect success, for the examinations are the only path to advancement. To pass them is to bring honor not only to yourself, but to your household, your ancestors, your descendants. To fail is not only personal disappointment, but a burden upon your family. Imagine the weight of such duty pressing upon you, day after day, as you grind your ink, copy your scrolls, repeat your passages. The examination itself is far away, perhaps years away, but its shadow fills every day. You imagine yourself in the examination hall, a vast courtyard, row upon row of tiny cubicles, each no larger than a closet. A wooden plank for a desk, another for a bed. 3 days inside, writing, reciting, composing. Food brought in sparingly, the air heavy, the silence absolute. You know that without years of discipline in silence, you would not survive even these 3 days. So every silent meal, every midnight recitation, every cold brick held against your feet is preparation for that trial. The seasons shape the scholar's endurance. In spring, the air smells of damp earth and blooming flowers, but within the room, the same grind continues. In summer, sweat runs down the face, the paper curls slightly in the heat, and insects hum in the still air. In autumn, the rustle of leaves accompanies the scratching brush, and the evenings grow cooler once again. In winter, the world shrinks into cold and silence. The breath mists in the lamplight, and the brush slows as fingers stiffen. Yet still, the study goes on. The nights are longest of all. Midnight study becomes routine. The lamp burns low, its flame dimming as the oil is consumed. The eyes blur, the head nods, but still the hand moves. Some scholars tie their hair to the rafters so that drowsiness pulls them upright. Others place needles lightly in their robes to prick them awake if they slump. These are not dramatic struggles. They are quiet, private, endured without complaint. Loneliness is part of the scholar's life. Hours stretch into days, days into months, months into years. Companionship is found only in the words of the sages, in the characters that flow endlessly onto paper. Yet there is comfort in the repetition. Each stroke of the brush is familiar. Each passage recited is like an old path walked again and again. The silence, while heavy, becomes its own rhythm, its own company, and in rare moments there is satisfaction. The look of a page filled with balanced characters, the gleam of fresh ink before it dries, the sense of progress, invisible to others, but felt within. A single passage fully memorized, after weeks of repetition, a character formed perfectly, symmetrical and true. These small triumphs are the reward of the scholar's long struggle. So imagine yourself once more at the low table. The lamp flickers beside you. The inkstone rests beneath your hand. The scroll stretches endlessly before you. Outside, the world changes. Seasons turn, the wind rises and falls, families gather and disperse. But here, in the scholar's room, the rhythm never changes. Grind the ink, lift the brush, copy the text. Eat in silence, study by lamplight, endure the cold, recite again. This is the life of the scholar in ancient China. A life of ink, cold rice and long scrolls. A life of silence, patience, and repetition, a life where stillness is not peace, but discipline. This was the quiet pain of study. Let us return now to the figure at the center of so many scrolls, the voice echoing across centuries. He was born in 551 BCE in the small state of Lu during what is now called the Spring and Autumn period. China at that time was not a single nation. It was a patchwork of states, each ruled by its own lord, often quarreling with neighbors, sometimes at war, sometimes at peace. It was an unsettled world, a world where stability was rare and trust was fragile. In such a place, the need for order, for guidance, was great. Confucius's family carried the memory of nobility, but not its wealth. His father, a soldier, died when Confucius was only a small child. His mother raised him alone in modest circumstances. From her, he learned patience, endurance, and the quiet strength of responsibility. From the absence of his father, he learned hardship and the sense that life could not be taken for granted. These early years shaped him. He was never far removed from the realities of ordinary people, and this gave him a sympathy, a gentleness, that would later mark his teachings. As a boy, he showed fascination not with games of power, but with ritual. He played at arranging ceremonies, placing vessels carefully, imitating the movements of ancestral rites. Ritual for him was not empty performance, it was a language of respect. It was a way of bringing order to a chaotic world. When the world outside seemed fractured and unstable, ritual offered him stillness and pattern. He grew into a tall, dignified man, with a voice described as steady, his manner calm and deliberate. He was not wealthy, but he carried himself with a certain gravity, a sense that what he said and did mattered. In adulthood, Confucius worked first in small positions in the court of Lu, as a clerk, as a manager of fields, even as a keeper of animals. These jobs were humble, yet he approached them with seriousness. For him, even the management of herds was a form of discipline, a way of learning order. He believed that no task was beneath a man who sought virtue, so long as it was done with sincerity, but his true calling was teaching. In a time when knowledge was often restricted, he chose to open his doors. His school was simple, a room, a mat, some scrolls, but it was revolutionary. He welcomed not just the sons of nobles, but those of farmers, merchants, and craftsmen. Birth was not his measure. Willingness to learn was. In this way, he laid the foundation for something remarkable, an education that could reach beyond privilege. His disciples gathered around him. Some came from far away, drawn by his reputation. They learned not only the classics, the songs, the rites, the histories, but also the way of living. Confucius was not content with empty words. He taught by example. His patience, his calm, his quiet endurance, these were lessons as powerful as the texts themselves. Among his disciples were men who would themselves become influential. Zilu, outspoken and bold, Yan Hui, humble and devoted, whom Confucius loved most dearly. And later, long after his death, thinkers like Mencius and Zunzi would expand upon his ideas, carrying them into future centuries. Confucius believed that the ruler should lead not by force, but by virtue. If the ruler is righteous, he would say, all will follow without command. This idea was gentle but radical. In a world dominated by armies and strong men, he spoke of patience, of moral example. He traveled to other states, hoping to find rulers who would embrace his vision. Sometimes he was welcomed. More often he was politely dismissed. Lords wanted armies, not philosophy. They sought quick victories, not long cultivation of virtue. It must have been difficult for him to know his ideas were sound, yet to see them ignored. And yet he did not abandon them. He returned again and again to his students, believing that change would come not through force, but through teaching. If rulers could not yet be persuaded, then perhaps the next generation could. Imagine him in his later years. He rises early, like his students centuries later would. He grinds ink, lifts his brush, and copies passages. He sits with his disciples in the quiet of the morning, discussing lines of poetry or the meaning of a ritual. He walks slowly in the garden, pointing out how each thing has its place, how harmony is natural when each fulfills its role. He speaks softly, his words simple but layered with meaning. His disciples listen, take notes, repeat his phrases to each other. In the evenings, he turns to music. His instrument, the qin, rests across his knees. The sound is soft, the notes deep and resonant. The music is not performed for show, but as a form of reflection. To him, music and ritual were partners, both shaping the soul, both teaching harmony. The strings vibrate gently, then fade into silence. His students sit quietly, absorbing not only the words he spoke, but the mood he created, calm, steady, enduring. When Confucius died, he was not a famous man. He held no great title, commanded no armies, ruled no lands. He passed away quietly, mourned deeply by his students. For them, he was more than a teacher. He was a model of what it meant to live with dignity, with patience, with purpose. They gathered his sayings, recorded his lessons, and compiled them into what we now call the Analects. Over time, his influence spread. Dynasties rose and fell, empires expanded and collapsed. And yet, through it all, Confucius's words endured. They became the foundation of civil service examinations, the very scrolls that scholars centuries later copied in silence. His patient philosophy, ignored by rulers in his lifetime, became the guiding principle of rulers long after. His ideas outlasted kingdoms, wars, and generations. So, as you think of Confucius, do not picture a man of drama or sudden triumph. Picture instead a quiet teacher seated with his students, guiding them with gentle patience. Picture him plucking the strings of his qin, the notes lingering like his words, calm, thoughtful, enduring. Picture him walking slowly, pointing out the harmony of nature, teaching not by command, but by presence. This was Confucius, the patient philosopher, the man who built a nation of thinkers, not with armies or wealth, but with silence, ritual, music, and words. Words that outlived him, words that still fill scrolls, words that shape the rhythm of scholars' lives for centuries to come. Think again of the scholar's table, the lamp burning low, the brush set aside. In front of him is not a simple copy of the Analects or the familiar book of songs. Instead, the scroll he unrolls feels different, almost heavier in its meaning. This is a text that was never meant for all eyes. The truth is that throughout Chinese history, not all books were welcomed. Some were elevated and copied endlessly. Others were silenced, sometimes through royal decree, sometimes through neglect, sometimes through deliberate destruction. To be a scholar meant not only to learn what was taught, but also to know what was missing, to sense the gaps where other voices once spoke. The Qin dynasty is remembered for the most dramatic silencing, the burning of books. Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor, feared that old philosophies might weaken his rule. Confucian scholars, with their talk of virtue and ritual, seemed troublesome to a ruler who preferred the strictness of law. And so the order came. Gather the books, burn them. Preserve only the practical and medicine, agriculture and law, and destroy the rest. But not all forbidden books were Confucian. There were also Taoist writings, mysterious and poetic, filled with paradox and imagery. The Taoists spoke of harmony with the natural world, of flowing with the Tao, the way. To some rulers, these words felt too free, too unanchored, too dangerous. For if men followed the Tao, they might resist the rigid commands of law. Such books, too, sometimes vanished into smoke. Other works belonged to the legalists, the sharp, uncompromising thinkers who valued order above all. Some emperors welcomed them, especially the Qin, who built their empire upon legalist principles. But later dynasties, wishing to soften their image, forbade certain legalist writings, afraid they might remind people of cruelty or tyranny. In this way, a philosophy could be celebrated in one generation, then hidden in the next. There were also mystical works, books on alchemy, promising the secrets of immortality, or on astronomy, charting the heavens with bold claims. Some emperors cherished them, hoping for eternal life. Others dismissed them, banning their circulation, fearing that they would spread false hope or rival visions of power. Even knowledge of the stars could be considered dangerous. The heavens, after all, were thought to mirror the empire. To predict eclipses or comets was to speak of omens, and omens could unsettle a ruler's authority. Imagine then the scholar who possesses such a text. He unrolls it slowly, the parchment fragile, the characters brushed in an older hand. Perhaps it is a Taoist classic, filled with strange images, the uncarved block, the flowing water, the endless way. Perhaps it is a legalist tract, its words sharp and severe, urging punishments and strict order. Or perhaps it is a manual of alchemy, describing metals and herbs, furnaces and elixirs. Each word feels heavy, for each word could bring danger. The forbidden book is read in silence. The lamplight flickers across its surface. Outside, the night deepens, but inside, a dialogue with the past continues quietly. There is wonder at the wisdom, the strangeness, the boldness of ideas once spoken freely. There is also fear of what it might mean if those words were discovered. In later times, the imperial libraries grew vast. They housed not only the approved classics, but sometimes carefully guarded copies of works no longer meant for public eyes. These collections were like double-edged swords. They preserved knowledge, but they also controlled it. To read freely was impossible. A scholar outside the palace could only dream of the texts held within. He might hear whispers of hidden treatises, rare books of strategy, of medicine, of forgotten dynasties. But he could not see them. The library was a treasure house, but also a prison of words. And yet books had a way of slipping through cracks. Families kept their own libraries, modest collections handed down through generations. A single shelf of scrolls might contain the state-approved classics beside one or two forbidden works, wrapped in cloth, hidden at the back. To inherit such a book was to inherit not only words, but a responsibility. To guard it, to copy it when it grew fragile, to pass it forward quietly. There are stories of rediscovery, moments when texts thought lost returned to the light. In the Han dynasty, fragments of the Book of Documents were found bricked into the walls of Confucius's family home, preserved by silence and stone. Other classics survived only because they had been memorized. Old men recited them slowly, line by line, their voices quavering but steady, while scribes hurried to record. Imagine that room. The air thick with concentration, the sound of brush against paper echoing the sound of voice. Knowledge reborn, not from ink, but from memory. The scholar who read forbidden books knew something profound, that knowledge was fragile, always at risk. A fire, an order, a single act of forgetting, and centuries could vanish. But he also knew that knowledge was resilient. For as long as someone remembered, as long as someone whispered, as long as a single copy survived in some hidden corner, the words could endure. And so, the Forbidden Library was not only a place of secrecy, it was a symbol of endurance. It lived in jars buried in the earth. It lived in scrolls sealed inside walls. It lived in memories recited from teacher to student. It lived in lamplit rooms where scholars unrolled fragile parchment with both reverence and caution. Picture it once more. The lamp, the fragile scroll, the faint scent of ink and dust. The silence of night is broken only by the soft breath of the reader. The words on the page are ancient, delicate and dangerous. Yet they live, preserved in stillness, carried forward by patience. This was the Forbidden Library of ancient China. Not one place, but many. Not a single collection, but a network of hidden voices. A reminder that stillness is not always peaceful. Sometimes it is the silence of resistance. Picture the scholar at the close of his long journey, the years of struggle, the endless copying of scrolls, the silent meals, the midnight recitations, the examinations that determined everything. All of these now belong to the past. He has endured service as an official, perhaps spending decades in the court, speaking carefully, bowing deeply, carrying out duties with patience. And now, in his later years, he withdraws. He leaves the court behind. He returns not to noise or splendor, but to quiet. The home he retires to is not extravagant. It is modest, but elegant in its simplicity. A walled garden surrounds it, with paths of stone leading in gentle curves. A pond lies at the center, its water still, reflecting the sky. Bamboo grows in clusters along the walls, their stalks tall and slender, their leaves whispering in the wind. A plum tree bends gracefully, its blossoms pale and fragrant in early spring. Each element is placed with care, for the scholar knows that harmony in the garden reflects harmony in the soul. In the mornings, he wakes to the sound of birdsong. The air is cool, carrying the scent of dew and pine. He steps out into the garden, his robe loose around him, his pace unhurried. He pauses beneath a cherry tree where petals fall like soft rain, landing gently on the surface of the pond. Koi swim below, their movements slow, gliding beneath lotus leaves that rise on slender stems. He watches them for a long while, without haste, for there is no longer any schedule to keep, no examinations to prepare for, no audience to impress. Time, once a burden, is now spacious. His study remains, but its purpose has changed. The desk is no longer piled with scrolls of Confucius to be memorized for duty. Instead, silk scrolls of poetry are unrolled, the brush lifted not in obligation but in pleasure. He writes poems about the garden, about the sound of rain, about the sight of the moon reflected on the pond. His brushstrokes are looser now, more fluid, less bound by fear of error. Each character feels like a breath, unhurried and natural. Beside him, a small kettle is set upon a flame. The water begins to steam. He prepares tea, the leaves unfolding slowly, releasing their fragrance. The aroma is gentle, earthy, with hints of flowers and grass. He pours the tea into a delicate cup, holds it between his palms, and drinks in silence. The warmth spreads through him. He sets the cup down and watches the steam curl upward, fading into the still air. The ritual of tea is itself a form of meditation, a quiet pause that reflects the flow of his life. In the afternoons, he sometimes receives friends, fellow scholars who, like him, have stepped away from official life. They arrive slowly, their robes plain but dignified, their hair silvered with age. Together, they walk through the garden, pausing to admire a stone carefully placed at the water's edge, or to listen to the breeze rustling through bamboo. They speak softly, reciting lines of poetry to one another. One begins a verse, and another finishes it. Sometimes they compose together, exchanging lines like ripples spreading across the pond. Their laughter is quiet, warm, and unhurried. In their company, silence is no longer discipline, but companionship. As the seasons pass, the garden changes, and with it, the scholar's reflections. In spring, blossoms fill the air, drifting like pale snow. In summer, the pond glimmers in sunlight, dragonflies skimming its surface. In autumn, the garden glows with red and gold leaves falling slowly, one by one. In winter, the trees stand bare, the pond rimmed with ice, the world hushed and still. Each season carries its own beauty, its own lesson. The scholar writes of them in verse, capturing not drama but quiet moments. The way frost lingers on a bamboo stalk, the way moonlight silvers the garden stones. Evenings are times of music. The chin, his zither of 7 strings, rests upon its stand. He lifts it, places it across his knees and begins to play. His fingers move gently, the notes resonant and calm. The melody is simple, repeating, like ripples on water. It is not for performance. It is not for others. It is for him, for reflection, for harmony. The sound drifts into the night, blending with the chirping of crickets, the croak of frogs by the pond, the distant call of a night bird. The music is part of the garden now, part of the stillness. Sometimes he is joined by family. A son, perhaps, who now serves in the examinations himself. A grandson, bright-eyed, practicing calligraphy at the low desk, his brush trembling as he tries to form the characters just right. The scholar smiles, watching quietly, remembering his own struggles at that age. He does not correct harshly, as he himself was once corrected. Instead, he guides gently, his voice calm, his hand steady. For he has learned that patience is more powerful than pressure. Other times, he is alone. He sits on the veranda, watching lanterns reflected in the pond. The night air is cool, the scent of pine and plum mingling. He remembers his youth, the cold bricks pressed against his feet as he studied, the silence of meals, the weight of forbidden scrolls hidden away. He remembers the heavy stillness that shaped him. And now he feels how different this silence is. No longer heavy, no longer a burden. It is light, spacious, a gift. This is the scholar's retirement. Not a life of grandeur, not a life of indulgence, but a life of balance. A cup of tea, a silk scroll, a poem beneath blossoms, a melody plucked on the kin, a pond where koi circle slowly. This is his wealth. This is his peace. And so the rhythm of stillness continues, but in a gentler form. The stillness of youth was endurance. The stillness of retirement is reflection. The silence of the study was discipline. The silence of the garden is harmony. Picture it one last time. The scholar seated beneath a cherry tree, blossoms falling around him, drifting on the pond. He lifts his brush and writes slowly on silk. He sets down the brush, lifts his cup, drinks his tea. He listens to the rustle of bamboo, the song of crickets, the faint echo of his chin. In this moment, the world is whole. You have traveled across a scholar's life in ancient China. You began in the small, cold study, where mornings started with the grinding of ink, where meals were eaten in silence, and where nights stretched long beneath the flicker of a single lamp. You felt the weight of endless repetition, of scrolls unrolled and copied, of discipline pressed into the bones. From there, you walked beside Confucius himself, the patient philosopher. You listened to his calm voice, his steady teachings, his belief that the world could be guided not by force, but by virtue. You saw him teaching his students, plucking the strings of his chin, living simply yet leaving behind words that echoed through centuries. Then you entered the hidden world of forbidden books. You imagined the flames of the chin, consuming libraries in days. You felt the hush of secrecy, as scrolls were hidden inside walls or preserved in memory alone. You sat with scholars who risked everything to copy forbidden words by lamplight, whispering them forward into the future. Stillness, in that world, was not peace, but resistance. At last, you stepped into the scholar's retirement garden. You walked beneath blossoms, listened to bamboo rustle in the wind, drank tea in silence, and heard the soft notes of the kin drifting into the evening air. You watched koi swim beneath lotus leaves and saw how silence, once heavy, became light, how stillness, once discipline, became harmony. And now, as this journey closes, imagine yourself resting in that same garden. The pond is calm. The lanterns glow softly, their light shimmering on water. The air is cool, scented with pine and blossoms. The world is hushed, the night deep. You are no longer the weary student, no longer the worried official, no longer the secret keeper of forbidden texts. You are the retired scholar, sitting beneath a tree, surrounded by peace. A silk scroll lies beside you. A cup of tea warms your hand. The sound of the kin lingers softly in the air. The rhythm of your breath is slow and steady. The world outside fades. The stillness is no longer demanding. It welcomes you. It soothes you. It holds you. And as you close your eyes, you carry with you the calm of the scholar's garden, a calm that drifts gently into sleep.